Long ago, in the land of Yamuns, where the hills rolled like waves and tall palm trees reached for the heavens, there was a kingdom kissed by sunlight and blessed with laughter. In this kingdom lived a young prince named Obinna, strong in body, noble in spirit, and the only son of King Azuto, whose name was known from river to river, across all of Alaibo. Yamuns flourished under King Azuto's rule. Drums echoed through the valleys, markets brimmed with life, and the people, rich and poor alike, loved their king. But it was Prince Obinna they admired most. With his sharp mind, gentle heart, and quiet strength, many believed he would be a ruler even greater than his father. But behind Obinna's warm smile was a restless longing. He had come of age, and the kingdom awaited his bride. Daughters of chiefs and merchants lined the palace gates, adorned in coral beads and silk wrappers, each hoping to be chosen. Yet one morning, Obinna stood before his father and said, I do not want a wife who loves my crown. I want a woman who sees my heart, who loves me as Obinna, not the prince of Yamuns. The king frowned. Where could such a love be found? King Azuto leaned back on his carved throne, stroking the gray hairs of his beard. Obinna, he said slowly, in these times, every maiden dreams of wealth, of silks, and feasts and a palace made of gold. They will bow before your name, but not your spirit. How can you find one who sees the man beneath the crown? Obinna's gaze did not waver. I will go into the world, father. Alone. No guards, no servants, no gold. I'll leave behind my robes and jewels. Let them meet me as a poor man, a traveler with dust on his feet. The one who sees me, truly sees me, will be my bride. The king's brows furrowed with worry. The world beyond these palace walls is not kind, my son. Not to those who appear to have nothing. Be careful. With his father's cautious blessing, Obinna shed his royal garments for simple cloth. He packed only a satchel of food and a walking stick carved by his late mother. The palace gates creaked open as dawn painted the land in gold. And so, the prince began his journey, not in power, but in humility, searching for love that gold could never buy. Obinna's first stop was the quiet village of Nkwoji, nestled just beyond the edges of his father's domain. It was a place of red clay roads and low houses with thatched roofs, where the smell of roasted yam and spiced pepper soup floated in the air like a song. He arrived as the sun dipped below the hills, bathing the earth in soft orange light. Children laughed in the distance, chasing goats through the dusty square. Somewhere nearby, a flute sang a lonely tune. Obinna, weary from walking, approached the first compound he saw. He knocked gently. The door creaked open, revealing a maiden with skin smooth like Aji wood and braids adorned with cowrie shells. Her name was Nena. Good evening, Obinna said, bowing slightly. I am a traveler in need of shelter. Could you spare some food and a place to rest? Nena's eyes moved over his worn tunic and bare feet. Her lips curled in disdain. We don't feed beggars here, she said coldly, and before he could reply, the door slammed shut. Obinna sighed, but hope still beat in his chest. He turned to the next home, hoping that kindness hadn't vanished entirely from the world. At the next compound, Obinna knocked with cautious hope. This time, the door opened to reveal a young woman dressed in a bright red wrapper, her wrists jingling with silver bangles. Her name was Ifeoma, and her beauty was the kind that turned heads in a market square. Obinna gave the same humble request, speaking gently and with respect. But Ifeoma tilted her head and let out a high, mocking laugh. You must be joking, she said, eyes scanning his dusty tunic. Do I look like someone who entertains beggars? You can't even afford sandals. Obinna said nothing as she turned her back and disappeared into the shadows of her well-lit home. He stood in the night air, the cold crawling into his bones. Village after village, door after door, the story repeated. Rejection. Ridicule. Dismissal. Some ignored him. Some laughed. Others shut their doors in his face without a word. Still, Obinna pressed on, carrying nothing but hope and a quiet prayer to the gods. Somewhere, he believed, there was someone who would see past the surface. Someone whose heart still remembered kindness. Days turned into weeks. Obinna's feet grew blistered, and his body grew lean with hunger, but his spirit did not bend. Then, one hazy afternoon, he arrived in a remote village called Agwanta, nestled between two gentle hills. It was humbler than the others, no fine clothes, no bustling market. Yet laughter rang from the courtyards, and strangers greeted one another with warmth in their eyes. The prince felt something different here. It was not in the size of the homes, but the feeling in the air. Ogwunta seemed to carry a gentleness that soothed even weary souls. As he walked toward the edge of the village, he spotted a small hut, its mud walls cracked, its thatched roof sloping as though bowed with time. Outside, a young woman swept the ground with slow, deliberate strokes. Her wrapper was faded, her skin dusted with earth, and yet she moved with quiet grace. Obinna stopped. His heart stirred, not with desire, but something deeper, a recognition of sorrow, strength, and serenity. She glanced up, catching him watching her. "Good evening," he said, stepping forward. "I am a traveler with no place to rest. Could you help me?" The young woman paused. Her eyes, tired, alert, and kind, met Obinna's. "My name is Adiz," she said softly, her voice warm like palm wine by firelight. "You may stay. My home is poor, but I will share what I have." Obinna felt something tighten in his chest. It was the first time since leaving the palace that someone had looked at him without scorn. Inside the hut, the air smelled of smoke and earth. Adiz handed him a bowl of boiled yam and red palm oil. It was simple, but he received it like a feast. They sat on a mat made of raffia. She asked nothing of his past, only about his journey, where he'd been, what he'd seen. They laughed. He listened to her speak of her late mother, of how she rose before dawn and slept long after the moon appeared. There was no bitterness in her tone, only strength. Obinna felt safe for the first time in many nights. He watched her and thought, not of wealth, nor of duty, but of how soft the world could be when someone chose kindness. In the days that followed, Obinna stayed in Ogwunta, helping Adiz fetch water, sweep the compound, and gather firewood from the forest edge. She never complained. Even under the sun's cruel gaze, she worked as though hardship were simply the air she breathed. But Obinna began to notice things, how she winced when she stood too quickly, how her smile faltered when she thought he wasn't looking. One night, as they sat beside a flickering fire, he turned to her. "Adiz," he asked gently, "why does your joy carry sadness?" She looked at him, startled, then turned her gaze to the flames. "Because I am not free," she whispered. "I belong to someone. A man who bought my life and buried it beneath his cruelty." Obinna's breath caught in his throat. "You're a slave?" She nodded. "My master lives at the top of the hill. I cannot leave this place, not without punishment. My body is here, but my heart," her voice cracked. "My heart wants to run." Obinna's fists clenched. For the first time in his journey, love collided with injustice. He wanted to protect her, to lift her from this cage. But he still hid who he was. That night, while Adiz slept on a mat of woven straw, Obinna stared at the ceiling of the small hut. The fire had long since died, but his heart burned with fury and compassion. She had shown him kindness when he had nothing to offer. She had opened her home without judgment, without expectation. And now, he knew the truth of her pain. He longed to tell her. To say, "I am Prince Obinna, son of Izuto. I can free you with a single word." But something held him back. What if, like the others, she changed when she knew? He would not risk it. Not yet. Instead, he made a silent vow. He would not leave until she was free. In the days that followed, he remained by her side. He worked with her, laughed with her, and watched the light return to her eyes little by little. The villagers began to notice. Whispers passed from mouth to mouth about the stranger who labored beside the slave girl, who never raised his voice or eyes above her. They did not know his name, but they saw something rare, a bond that grew without riches or reason. Weeks passed like rivers beneath the bridge of time. Obinna and Adiz became inseparable. In the early hours, they walked barefoot across dew-soaked fields. At midday, they shared roasted maize beneath the kola tree. At night, they told stories, some real, others spun from dreams they dared not speak aloud. To Obinna, Adiz was no longer the girl sweeping her master's yard. She was a fire wrapped in gentleness, a melody in the wind. To Adiz, Obinna was not just a traveler, he was safety. His presence brought stillness to the noise in her soul. Yet fear lingered. She did not dare dream of a life beyond the village. She had known too much disappointment to believe in escape. Obinna knew the time was coming. He could no longer keep his truth hidden. But the weight of it threatened everything they'd built. What if revealing who he was shattered this fragile peace? One morning, as the sun crept slowly over the hills, Obinna turned to her. His hands trembled. "Adiz," he said, "there is something I must tell you." Adiz froze. The way he said her name carried a gravity she'd never heard before. Obina stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. I am not who you think I am, he began. I am not a wanderer. I am not poor. She blinked, confused. I am Obina, son of King Izuto of the Yumon's kingdom. I came in disguise, hoping to find someone who would love me not for my title, but for my heart. The silence that followed felt eternal. Adiz took a step back, her breath shallow. You're a prince? He nodded slowly, afraid of the storm behind her eyes. Yes. And I've never been more certain of anything than this, I love you. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then, slowly, tears filled her eyes, not of fear, but of overwhelming emotion. I don't care about your crown, she whispered. Or your title. You showed me kindness when you had nothing. You chose me when I had nothing. That is all that matters. Obina stepped forward, took her trembling hands in his, and smiled with deep relief. Finally, he had found the one. Word traveled ahead of them like wind through the forest. When Obina returned to the palace, hand in hand with Adiz, the guards blinked in disbelief. Behind them walked not just a prince, but a woman in tattered clothes and no shoes, one who did not bow, but stood with quiet dignity. King Izuto came to meet them at the gates. His eyes widened when he saw the girl at his son's side. Obina bowed. Father, this is the one. She saw me as a man, not a prince. Her heart is pure. I love her. Izuto studied Adiz's face. There was something powerful in her stillness, something regal, despite the mud on her wrapper. The king nodded. Then she is welcome. Whispers rushed through the kingdom. A slave girl? Marrying the heir? But when the people heard of her kindness, her strength, and her love, hearts softened. The palace maids who had once dreamed of marrying a prince now watched in awe as a woman they would have overlooked became a bride. The wedding of Prince Obina and Adiz was unlike anything the Yumon's kingdom had seen. Red and gold cloths hung from the palace walls. Drummers pounded rhythms that shook the earth. Flute players weaved melodies through the crowd, while dancers spun in circles, feet coated with white chalk. Adiz stood adorned in a gown of the finest silk, her hair wrapped in golden thread, beads clinking around her neck. Her eyes shone, but behind them danced disbelief. Once, she had cried in the dark corners of Aguanta, her future bound in chains. Now, she stood in the center of a world that had once ignored her. Obina waited at the altar, his heart thundering with pride. When their eyes met across the courtyard, all the doubts and pain melted into memory. They exchanged vows beneath a canopy of palm leaves, promising to walk together through every joy and sorrow. When the final blessing was spoken, the kingdom roared in celebration. Obina turned to Adiz. You are no longer a servant, he whispered. You are my queen. While the kingdom rejoiced, not all hearts were filled with joy. From the shadows of the crowd, Nena, Ifioma, and others from the villages Obina had visited before stood silently. Their faces, once proud and painted, were now tight with regret. They had laughed at the prince when he wore dust and simplicity. They had seen only his clothes, never his spirit. Now, they watched Adiz walk beside him, glowing with a light they could not touch. She was nothing, Nena whispered. A slave girl. But she saw what we didn't, Ifioma murmured. Their bitterness twisted into envy. But it was too late. The prince had made his choice, and he had chosen not beauty or status, but heart. The drumming continued into the night, but for those left behind, the silence within was deafening. Peace settled over the palace in the weeks that followed. Obina and Adiz moved through the halls like sun and moon, different, yet bound in harmony. The people of Yumon's came to love their new queen, not because of her crown, but because she never forgot who she had been. Adiz walked among the poor, fed the hungry, and listened to the forgotten. She was a queen who understood suffering and used her voice to lift others from it. But not all hearts were softened. High on a distant hill, in a house once owned by cruelty, Odogwo, Adiz's former master, seethed with rage. How can this be? He hissed. A slave, a girl I owned, is now the queen of Yumon's? Odogwo had spent his life hoarding power, using fear as his blade. Now, all his greed had brought him nothing but an empty house and a name laced with shame. And he would not let it end this way. By night, Odogwo paced his compound, rage tightening every breath. The image of Adiz standing beside the prince haunted him. She had once swept his floor, now she ruled from a golden throne. His pride could not swallow it. I will destroy her, he muttered. If I cannot own her, I will end her. He began to plot. He remembered the palace well. Years ago, he had visited King Izuto on business. He knew its secret paths, the way the guards rotated their watch, the tunnels carved beneath the foundation. He would wait for the perfect night. A moonless one. A night when the palace slept deeply in its silence. And when that night came, Odogwu would slip inside and steal back the one thing he believed still belonged to him. The night arrived like a whisper. A black sky hung over Yumans. No moon. No stars. Just clouds heavy with secrets. The palace stood still, its torches dimmed, the royal court long asleep. Obina and Adiz lay side by side, her head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Neither of them knew that a shadow moved through the garden. Odogwu, cloaked in darkness, slipped through the palace gates. He carried a dagger beneath his cloth, its handle stained from 100 old sins. Every step he took was driven by hatred, by the memory of a girl who had once bowed before him, now walking where only queens dared tread. He made his way toward the royal chamber. Just a few more steps, and vengeance would be his. But fate, even in silence, had its own plans. A soft clink echoed in the marble hallway. It was barely a sound, a misstep, the dagger grazing stone, but in the silence of the palace, it was a scream. A guard patrolling nearby turned swiftly. "Who goes there?" he barked. Odogwu froze. His body blended into the shadows, but his breath betrayed him. The guard moved closer, spear drawn. From within the chamber, Obina stirred. His eyes flew open just as another shout rang through the halls. "Intruder!" Within seconds, chaos erupted. Bells clanged. Feet thundered. Guards surged into the corridor. Odogwu ran, but he was old, and rage does not make the legs faster. They caught him before he reached the gates, dragging him to the ground as his dagger clattered to the floor. Obina rushed out, Adiz behind him, her eyes wide with horror. And when they saw the man who had tried to take her life, her past returned in a single breath. "Odogwu," she whispered. The next morning, the royal court gathered in the great hall. The air was tense, thick with anger. Guards stood shoulder to shoulder as Odogwu was dragged before the throne, his wrists bound in chains. King Izuto's voice thundered, "You dared to enter my house with the intent to kill?" Odogwu raised his chin. "She belongs to me. You may dress her in silk, but I know what she is." Gasps echoed across the room. Obina stepped forward, fists clenched. "She belongs to no man. Not now. Not ever again." Izuto turned to Adiz. "My daughter, what justice do you seek?" She looked at the man who had once stolen her life. The man who had called her worthless. The man who now knelt, broken and desperate. Adiz's voice was steady. "Let him go." The room fell silent. Let him live long enough to witness the joy he tried to destroy. That will be his punishment. The king nodded. "So be it. Odogwu is banished. Let no gate in Yumans open to him again." And so, the man who once ruled through cruelty was cast into the wilderness. In the days that followed, Adiz's name was whispered not with pity, but with reverence. The girl once bound in chains had chosen mercy over revenge. She walked through the streets of Yumans, no longer as a stranger, but as their queen. Children gathered around her, calling her Nne Ani, our mother. Women kissed her hands, tears shining in their eyes. She used her new voice to change the laws. No man or woman could be held as property again. Every slave was given freedom. Those who had nothing were given land and tools to rebuild. Obina watched her with awe. She had not only stolen his heart, she had taught him how to rule. Together, they led with grace, and the kingdom bloomed under their hands. Years passed, and the palace changed. Laughter returned to its walls. Gardens bloomed brighter. Music played longer into the night. Obina and Adiz had children, 3 bright-eyed boys and a girl with her mother's quiet strength. They ran through the palace halls, chasing one another beneath banners of red and gold. Obina taught them how to be just, how to lead with their ears before their mouths. Adiz taught them how to be kind, how to see the world not from the throne, but from the ground where pain still lived. Together, they taught their children that love, true love, is born not in palaces, but in hearts that choose to see. One evening, Obina sat beneath the kola tree with his eldest son. "Papa," the boy asked, "how did you know Mama was the one?" Obina smiled, the wrinkles at his eyes deepening. "Because she loved me when I had nothing. Because she gave, even when she had little. And because she reminded me who I was, not as a prince, but as a man." The boy nodded slowly. "And what if people laugh at me when I do things differently?" he asked. Then let them laugh, Obinna replied. And let them watch when the truth wins. In distant villages, women like Nena and Ifeoma watched from afar as Adi's story passed from mouth to mouth. They sat in compounds that once bustled with suitors, now quiet with time. Some tried to silence their regret. Others let it bloom inside them, heavy and full. They had been given a moment to look deeper, and they had blinked. Now, they whispered to their daughters, look past the wrapper, past the shoes, past the gold. What matters is the heart beneath. Humans grew into legend. Travelers spoke of the prince who walked barefoot among the poor and the slave girl who became queen. Of a love that defied pride. Of a kingdom built not just on power, but on humility. Obinna and Adis ruled until their hair turned white and their hands trembled. When they passed, they were laid to rest beneath the great kola tree where they had once sat in silence. And every year, the people gathered there, laying flowers, telling the story once more. That true love is not chosen by crowns or coins. It is found in fire, tested by time, and sealed in kindness. Years turned like the pages of a well-worn book. Generations rose and fell, and still, the tale of Obinna and Adis lived on. In schools, children recited their story as part of history. In marketplaces, griots beat their drums and sang of the prince who chose humility and the girl who turned mercy into a crown. But for some, it was more than a tale, it was a torch. There were boys in distant villages who chose kindness over pride, because Obinna had done the same. There were girls who, though born into hardship, lifted their heads high, remembering Adis' grace and fire. The story was not kept in scrolls or carved into stone, it was passed in whispers, in lullabies, in the hush before dusk when elders gathered under the mango trees and began with. Long ago, in the land of humans. The past did not fade. It became a compass. At the foot of the great kola tree, where Obinna and Adis now rested side by side, a small plaque stood, worn smooth by time. The words carved into it were simple. They ruled with love. They chose with their hearts. They remembered the forgotten. Beneath it, a young couple knelt, newly wedded, hands intertwined. The woman wore no jewels, the man no royal robe, but their eyes sparkled with the same fire that had once drawn Obinna and Adis together. Do you think it's true? The woman asked softly. That a prince gave up everything just to find love? The man nodded. It must be. The kingdom is what it is because of them. They sat there for a long time in silence, listening to the wind rustle through the tree's leaves. And somewhere in that breeze was the memory of a boy with dust on his feet and a girl with courage in her bones. A prince. A slave. Two hearts, unbeholden to the world. Their love had outlived wealth. It had survived envy. It had become legend. And like all true love, it never truly ended. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more folktales. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on our next story. Years turned like the pages of a well-worn book. Generations rose and fell, and still, the tale of Obinna and Adiz lived on. In schools, children recited their story as part of history. In marketplaces, griots beat their drums and sang of the prince who chose humility and the girl who turned mercy into a crown. But for some, it was more than a tale, it was a torch. There were boys in distant villages who chose kindness over pride, because Obinna had done the same. There were girls who, though born into hardship, lifted their heads high, remembering Adiz's grace and fire. The story was not kept in scrolls or carved into stone, it was passed in whispers, in lullabies, in the hush before dusk when elders gathered under the mango trees and began with, "Long ago, in the land of Yamuns." The past did not fade. It became a compass. At the foot of the great kola tree, where Obinna and Adiz now rested side by side, a small plaque stood, worn smooth by time. The words carved into it were simple. They ruled with love. They chose with their hearts. They remembered the forgotten. Beneath it, a young couple knelt, newly wedded, hands intertwined. The woman wore no jewels, the man no royal robe, but their eyes sparkled with the same fire that had once drawn Obinna and Adiz together. "Do you think it's true?" the woman asked softly. "That a prince gave up everything just to find love?" The man nodded. "It must be. The kingdom is what it is because of them." They sat there for a long time in silence, listening to the wind rustle through the trees' leaves. And somewhere in that breeze was the memory of a boy with dust on his feet and a girl with courage in her bones. A prince. A slave. Two hearts, unbeholden to the world. Their love had outlived wealth. It had survived envy. It had become legend. And like all true love, it never truly ended.